joining us on this webinar, on this call from. Welcome to the Chapman Group's most recent webinar that's going to be covering metrics that would measure strategic account management organization effectiveness. As some more attendees join the meeting and the webinar, I'm going to go through a couple administrative details to make sure everybody's in the know that's on the call. My name is Denny Chapman Jr. I am a managing partner in charge of business development at the Chapman Group, and I am also your Sherpa or your guide for the webinar that you're on right now. If you have any questions that come up or thoughts or things you'd like answered by Dennis Sr. or myself throughout the webinar, there is a question window or a chat window where you could type in what it is that you would like to have answered or discuss or hear talked about on the webinar. Please use that as much as you like, and we will try to make sure that we have enough time at the end to address as many, if not all, of those questions or thoughts. This webinar is being recorded, and it, along with the slides, will be sent out individually to the people that are on the webinar now. And for those that may not be on the webinar or who you may want to share this information with, this webinar and others are posted on chapmanhq.com in our library for download, replay, etc., all free of charge out there for you so that you can learn some more best practices and get some extra value in helping you manage and grow relationships and revenues inside of your top accounts. We have a good probably 35 or 40 minutes on the phone and on the webinar today with Dennis Sr., who is going to be chatting with everyone about the metrics that organizations have been utilizing to measure the effectiveness of their strategic account management program, which is an interesting topic, especially around this time of year, because you're going to get a lot of, if you're anything like our clients and prospects, a lot of justification questions about budgets and initiatives and things you may want to do to help improve your SAM program or your key account management organization. And this webinar is going to help provide some of those metrics and measurements that you can utilize to show to people inside of your company how effective, how important, and how much value your SAM program is delivering. I don't want to waste any more time because all the good stuff is going to come from Dennis Sr. here. So I'm going to open up the PowerPoint, and I'm going to turn over the phone to Dennis, and he is going to enlighten you on the metrics that will measure your strategic account management organization's effectiveness. Thank you.
Denny, thank you very much. I appreciate that fine introduction and covering all the administrative pieces. And, you know, only thing I can add to that is thank you for everyone attending today, and kudos for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to continuously learn and improve as it relates to strategic account management and being successful. Just to reinforce what Denny mentioned, we will have time at the end of the Q&A. I hope to get through the PowerPoint in probably 30 minutes or so, and then have some Q&A around the questions that we receive throughout the presentation. So, without further ado, you know, not that we all would, but what if there was such a thing as the Daily SAM Advisor in the business section, and we picked up the morning paper, and the headline read, SAM program costing millions, company executives questioning spend. Director of Strategic Accounts Program claims program is effective, has no facts to support their claim, program facing termination. Probably not exactly the type of headline either or any of us would like to see relevant to our own program, but we do live in an economy today that is extremely economics focused and results oriented. So I'm sure in my travels I've talked to many directors of SAM programs and SAMs themselves, and without fail, everyone has always asked about what the SAM program is delivering. Well, our argument, when you get or could see a news flash like this that would come in, is that you could have known if your program was not delivering as expected through what we call metrics or predictive analytics. And those are the core topic of what we're talking about today that provide us what we could call a now look at the effectiveness of our SAM program. These analytics tell us if we're really being successful and will we be successful in the future. They, for all practical purposes, predict the future, and hence why some of these analytics are what we call predictive analytics, which are much different. Most of what we're going to talk about here today are more predictive analytics versus what a lot of people have learned in the past around lagging indicators such as revenue. You know, the other thing that we have to deal with is leaders today have a tendency to roam the halls or get on the calls or be in meetings. And there's these three questions that in SAM programs that we see quite often. How much revenue and profits are coming from our SAM accounts this year, quite often against our plan? Why did we lose that account? This is always a tough one. And didn't we know that account was in trouble? And then we really get this question more and more because there's an investment associated with a SAM program, is what's the real difference here between our SAM program and our traditional selling process? Because it's perceived that it costs more and maybe the return's not understood. So really what I'd like to deliver to you today is some metrics that are going to really, and that's our topics today, help you address all those things. Keep that headline out of the daily SAM advisor, as well as have those answers for your leadership team as you move through your career as a SAM or a SAM program director. Today's conversation is going to be around team-oriented metrics, voice of the customer, some revenue and relationship metrics, opportunity metrics, high-value activity team metrics, and even financial operating ratios that you might want to look at operating within for the future. I'm going to sort of end giving you a sample of 2 or 3 examples of scorecards, effectiveness ratings that you could use or think about using in your own organization. You know, my grandmother was always famous for her apple pie, and the one thing she did before she passed on to other places a few years ago was everybody said, Grandma, you got to write that recipe down, and she did, and she gave it to the family, and there was just little ads of ingredients that made it such a great apple pie. And I really know that when we talk about business or life in general, there's always this recipe for success. So what we're talking about here today is what we really need to be thinking about doing in a SAM program is this is the recipe success, having the right people, doing those right things, the right times, the cadence, to the right customers and prospects. And we should measure all this, have metrics around that, and certainly consistently coach to it. I mean, this is the essence of what we're talking about. So one of the guiding posts for us today is to make sure that we have these measurements and metrics that make sure our recipe is consistent and delivering what it needs to deliver. So an effective SAM or SAM program, how would we define that? Well, in today's world, it's one that really delivers those required expected outcomes, and this is very important, of both the supplier and the customer of the account. And by the way, we need to do that within time frames, timelines, and we're all challenged with the resources we have. We sometimes talk about account teams, and sometimes account teams are 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, sometimes a little more robust around large accounts. And then here's a little bit of the challenge that we all live with every day. We got to do it within operating budgets, and we got to make plans. That's the performance ratios, some of the metrics that we have to deliver. So really, when we say what's an effective SAM or SAM program, this is the benchmark that literally, in what you see in blue there, we could say yes, yes, yes to all of that. Now, some infamous sayings that I sort of grew up with and I share with others quite regularly is really, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And measure what you or your account require and expect. So what we know today, in an era of big data, I sometimes recommend to people, if I had a youngster growing up today and they weren't sure what they wanted to do and they were pretty good with math, I'd point everybody to the analytics field, to be analysts of some nature, or very good with analysis, facts, figures, information, because we live in a world of charts, graphs, pie charts, bar charts, trending analysis. We live in that world because we want to quantify, and we need to quantify everything so that we can measure it, inspect it, and take the corrective action necessary to continuous our improvement process. Now, just for a common definition, when I talk about a metric, it's really this, it's a measurement standard. And we see metrics all around us every day. We see them in our cars. The speedometer is a metric. It's telling us how fast we're going versus the posted speed limit. When we cook cookies, the time set and the temperature are metrics because the recipe calls for 375 degrees at 12 minutes. That's the recipe, the metrics for success. We see metrics in healthcare for blood pressure. You go in and a doctor will take your blood pressure and he's looking against a benchmark that says you're within or outside of the recommended tolerance for the top and bottom numbers. So we live in a world of metrics. The nice things about metrics is they're readily available. They allow us to get a now look of how we're doing today, and we can take that action necessary to make sure that we get in either better health, cook the cookies better, or maybe drive within the right speed limit. In a SAM program, they guide us to operate in accordance with what will probably produce the best results. We do believe that when we measure and manage SAM performance, it would be ideal, and we recommend this. The nice thing is technology is somewhat caught up to us today, is to have some form of a dashboard that we work within to help us guide us and be our guiding post around whatever metrics our organization lands on. Now, one of the questions I get quite a bit is how many metrics do we want to really incorporate in a SAM program or even a sales program? And I think it varies by organizations, but probably you quite often are going to land on 3 to 5. Some more mature programs might land on 5 to 7. But they got to be the right ones. What I'm going to be offering today is sort of an a la carte of probably 7 of maybe a menu of probably 15 or 20 that I could offer up that are probably valuable. Now keep in mind that when we start talking about dashboards, is one critical part of dashboards is what people are interested in will vary by senior leaders, by mid-managers, and by the SAMs themselves, strategic account managers. So whatever measurements and metrics I do look at, I probably need to be able to sort and filter that data and views based on the team, the program, or the corporation. So I got to keep that in mind of whatever tools or practices I incorporate. So let's get into the hardcore stuff here and talk about some metrics. One of the first metrics that we recommend is more of an internal view, and we call it a team situational assessment. It's sort of envision a team getting together and having a template that scores out current situation within the customer as it relates to the financial state between your customer and you as a supplier, the account situation around their competitiveness, their products, their future, or the merger acquisition situation, the relationship of their purchasing to your products and services as its value and wallet share, your competitive situation, your advantages, disadvantages, strengths and weaknesses, and certainly relationships. So there's these templates that are developed that measure these kind of things that create what we would call an internal team situational assessment index. As you see on the left side of your screen, one of the nomenclatures that's sometimes used around this, it's sort of a risk analysis. It gives us a comparative of where we would like to be, that's that benchmark, and where we are based on the team's discussion and collaboration. And some people might say, well, some of this might be subjective versus quantitative. Well, one thing we know, and for example, I just did some recent readings on something called the Bayesian principle. When more than 2 or 3 people start to collaborate on something and agree on something, the probability of what they determine as a team becomes more quantitative and higher probability of being correct. So keep that in mind, that through team collaboration, we can convert quite often what we might have traditionally called subjective information into more quantitative analysis. Now, the next metric that we're going to speak about today is an account loyalty index. So we just talked about an internal metric from the team, and if you think about triangulating data around an account, what about an external metric? And we call that a loyalty index, or sometimes in the industry referred to as a voice of the customer. It still surprises me a little bit today in how few companies have what I would say is a rich, detailed voice of the customer feedback versus what could be very valuable to help enable a more effective account plan with the customer. You know, I certainly see out there the net promoter scores, the metric that says 35% are promoters, or the net promoter score is 35%. I think they're all admirable metrics. It's certainly better than not having anything. However, our position is when you're managing top accounts, you want very rich information, because look at what the impact of having a loyal customer or strategic account really is. 14% greater chance of repurchase, 31% greater chance of more product share of wallet of what they spend for your like products and services, higher penetration of product portfolio diversity, 43% greater delta, and look at new product penetration. These aren't our numbers. These are by a study done by the Corporate Executive Board several years ago. So really the message is, if I can listen to the voice of my customer, learn more about it, and work on it and create this ultimate loyalty index, as you see, 88.5 or whatever it is for you, I can create better alignment between myself, the supplier's world, and the customer world, because without this, what we're seeing today is that suppliers are losing traction because they don't totally understand all the elements of the customer's world. And to do that, we recommend a methodology that we actually deliver with our clients, what we call a loyalty index that measures two critical areas, performance and commitment. And in performance, it's let's measure people, relationships. And as you get higher ratings over time, you'll see to the far right that the trust meter, and by the way, this is what we're after, is building ultimate trust between us as a supplier and our account. Now here's the real challenge. If some of my survey practices or tools are too shallow, it doesn't give me the facts or information to build the trust meter or to raise it. I don't have enough facts or insights. So I need them about my people, I need them about my products and solutions, and I need them about my organization so I can take appropriate actions to keep building and increasing the temperature of the trust meter. And ultimately, I get to the highest level by getting good reads in the commitment level that we know that in addition to, on the left side, performance, that really the behavior that we're seeing that the customer is committed, the indicator that we're important to them, they would likely recommend us, and that there's a commitment that they're going to work with us for the long term. So when I look at, you know, the whole concept of doing surveys and getting voice of the customer, I want to get rich feedback, I want to analyze it, and what we deliver for our customers that we would recommend you look for either internally or whoever you work with is some form of a prescription for success. And what that is taking that metric and converting that feedback into action planning, to the point of actually using that action planning to feed my strategic account plan and enable me to be more effective engaging with my customer. The third metric that I want to speak to today is revenue. And one of the important facts here is we know that all organizations are very bottom line or top line focused, and you know, what are you producing? And what we know today, through whether it be SAMA studies or our own studies or historical information from our customers, that SAM programs that are well orchestrated and run well produce better results. They produce sales that are sometimes 8 to 16% higher, greater degrees of profitability. Their pipeline, opportunity pipeline, is bigger and richer. As you saw before, greater wallet share of 31%, retention level of customers are higher, and new product adoption is higher. So really, over time, what you want to do is take some of these 6 or several factors like these, track them for your SAM program, produce your actuals, but you also want to capture those as an organization in your traditional selling accounts and compare, and hopefully you should see this, a well-oiled SAM program should produce the results that are greater than the traditional selling program. We were working with a client in the last, probably 7, 8 years, and their answer to this that they had documented is their SAM program was producing 20% greater revenue than their traditional selling to accounts. That's substantial. That was justification for a continuous investment and focus on the SAM program. The fourth metric today is what we call account relationship penetration, the ARPI. And that's really measuring the high, wide, deep of the relationships we have with our customers. We know, we've all heard how important it is to get high. We now know in SAM programs it's important not just to get high, but get high, wide, and deep. And we got to sustain those relationships. So ultimately, I want to measure them. I want to measure my relationship management network, and I want to know what is the percentage of my contacts by management level. How aligned are they in the center chart? How are my distribution of contacts by business unit? What are the average ratings with a scoring mechanism that tell me the penetration index as it relates to my relationship network? And what is those average ratings by a business unit? When I look at all of that, I want to know what my account relationship penetration index is so that I at least have a benchmark, and I continuously focus on that as an organization. Because what I know is the more effective I am high, wide, and deep, and the more aligned the client influencers are to us as a supplier, the greater relationship I'll enjoy, which translates into revenue and profitability. The next metric we want to speak to is the Opportunity Pipeline Improvement Index. And that is, before I get into that, is very driven by what we call a qualifier rating. So when we measure pipeline, we want to move away from traditional probability of getting business metrics and saying we have a 50% chance of getting it because they like us, we play golf with them, we've been there 3 or 4 times, we've given them a proposal. What we know is there is some correlation to doing a needs assessment, delivering a proposal, but that's a very small part of the equation. We recommend a much more deeper dive in what we call qualifiers that indicate to us some form, as you see on the left side, some form of a metric so that every opportunity we look at, we have a rating, and when we take appropriate actions based on that qualifier, which by the way is quite often, we have a standard practice around a qualifier that might have 10 or 15 elements. They may vary by client based on industry and particular product solutions. But we want to then forecast by qualifier rating, but we want to coach to the qualifier rating of where the gaps are so that we have a higher probability of getting that business. Because that's what then takes our financial data and our opportunity metrics of, for example, our estimated revenue by rating. That gives us a higher probability of effectively forecasting against future revenue. The other thing we know when we use the opportunity qualifier is that we have a higher probability of closing that business because we take the right action. If this metric is what we know by using qualifier ratings and also opportunity pipeline measuring this, we know in an effective SAM program we see increases in the whole number of opportunities and the number of opportunity increases. Okay. The next metric is metric 6, which is the high value activity metrics that we're speaking to, and this is really important. We know if you think back to the recipe, we do things to the right people, the right number of times, the right things, all right? And we want to measure some of that. For example, we want to track what we might call our SAM high-value activities. Examples, VIP visits, executive sponsor meetings, joint development agreements, collaborative action planning. These are high-value activities, internal business reviews, external business reviews. We want to measure that because they will be basically an indicator. They will be an indicator of how successful we are. The key learning point that we have learned over the years as it relates to high-value activities is that there is a direct relationship between the effective execution and measuring high-value account management activities and optimum performance. The net of what I'm saying there is they produce greater sales results. If we do the right things the right number of times, it produces greater results. The final metric for today's discussion is around operating expenses. And the world has got a movement, a focus on economics. And one of the things that I've been experiencing and observing in the marketplace is more and more organizations trying to figure out sort of a job costing approach. Is that strategic account profitable? Is our strategic account management program profitable? So there's a tremendous movement with sophistications of CRMs and business warehouses and information of being able to track fixed and variable expenses related to a SAM program or a SAM account so that I can ultimately benchmark a ratio of SAM operating expenses, fixed plus variable, versus the revenue that's being appreciated from a customer. Now, we've learned a couple things. I've been studying these kind of numbers for a few years, and these aren't always exact, but here's some observations. We're starting to see in newer, not so mature startup SAM programs that this is quite often that operating expenses, fixed plus variable, can be 2.3 to 2.5% of revenue. So you have to take a hard look at your own organization, but certainly you want to get at least an initial benchmark of whatever you consider fixed and variable over revenue so you understand your current state of expenses versus revenue. What we're seeing in more mature SAM programs, and this is to be expected, I guess, because as SAM programs mature and they're more effective, we see a drop. So we're seeing greater revenue, maybe even some continued increase in expenses, but an acceleration of revenue so that the OPEX, the sales expenses, down to 1.2, 1.5% of revenue. Very important metric, especially for organizations that are very CFO-driven or financial-driven, which probably represents about 98% of corporate America or the world. So, taking all those 7 metrics that we just talked about, the SAM and SAM program effective ratings, what do I do with them? Well, I'm going to give you a few suggestions. One approach is you could create metrics around what we call best practices within the SAM program, and you see infrastructure, process, 8 best practices, and have a scorecard that says how are we doing today against these best practices. We actually work with customers and offer a free diagnostic tool that says where are you today against these best practices, and what is your goal to be in the next period, and what's best in class, so that you can pinpoint where you might be weak. For example, you may be weak in planning. Maybe your account plan template is not as strong as it needs to be. You may be weak per day's discussion on measurements and metrics. But you want to take, this is a best practices scorecard around your SAM program where you have a metric developed of how effective the best practices you're implementing are. Another approach we've recommended that companies use today is very specific to a team leader or a SAM, is to have a scorecard approach of how effective the SAM is in performance management, which are production metrics, leading, managing, coaching their team, so that ultimately they have sort of a self-appraisal collaboration with their leader, an effectiveness rating, as you see on the bottom of your screen, of like 80% in this particular example, against prescribed practices of the team in the SAM. So this is a little more on a personalized basis, a metric to measure effectiveness at the SAM. It could be also at the team level. And then finally, how about a program effectiveness approach? What does that look like for the program? And this is where you would take whatever metrics you land on as the best for your organization and situation, you weight them. We would suggest you weight them in how important they are, and then what the current rating is that the metric is producing, and you come up with what we would call a weighted value. By the way, metrics are quite often a benchmark, not a pass-fail. What I want to do is use them to improve from. So in this particular case, my SAM program effectiveness, based on the metrics I'm using, is 60. And over time, I'd like to drive that to be higher. Now, what that might work in concert with is this. One way to drive that is also measuring how effective we are at best practices. Because ultimately, the better the best practices of our SAM program, probably the greater results we'll see in some of these other metrics. So as you continue to launch into the world of strategic account management, now often called a profession, which is really, it's probably one of the most important positions or roles in any organization and should be treated as such, we need to focus on what are our metrics. And today I've talked about the team metric, the voice of the customer, revenue comparatives, relationship ratings, opportunity pipeline, high-value activities, and financial performance. So this is information for you to think about, digest, and say, what's right for my organization? And basically, I want to take these thoughts and start trying to institutionalize metrics that are much more quantitative so that the facts plus your experience give me that ultimate or optimum knowledge level, leading us to no longer fear in these questions. When we are asked these questions by our leadership or others, we have answers. We have answers at our fingertips because metrics are on demand and readily available that support the positive answers that we can give is that our program does produce higher than average results. And finally, when we wake up in the morning, we no longer see the other headline, we see a different headline. And the headline in the local SAM Advisor is SAM program produces millions. Company executives support greater investment. Director of Strategic Accounts claims program is so effective that the company is having trouble keeping up with demand. These are the headlines that I can guarantee to you, if we use metrics, stay to our game, and focus on them, and increasingly and consistently improve, that we'll appreciate. So before I turn it over to Denny, and we all start to see this news flash in our local gazettes, I'd like to thank everybody for their time today, and we've received some questions, and I'm going to open it back up to Denny so that we can answer some of the questions we've received.
Thank you, Dennis. I hope everybody was able to find some value in learning about different types of metrics that you can use to either prove the effectiveness, validate the effectiveness of your SAM program, or these are metrics that might be able to point out or show gaps or areas for improvement within your SAM organization, knowing what some of the best practices and the benchmarks may be for other SAM type of organizations. So utilize them either which way. We do have a few questions. The first one is going to be sort of similar on what I just mentioned here, but this person is at the beginning stages of a SAM program, so they have a less mature program, and they want to know, for a less mature program, what are the top 2 or 3 metrics that they should focus on to determine their effectiveness?
Well, I really think that that's a great question because it gets a little complicated when I show a lot. But I would focus certainly, and not any specific order, but I'd make sure I've got voice of the customer, a very strong voice of the customer loyalty index. I'd make sure that I got pretty good reporting around my financial performance. And I'd want to make sure that I understood my relationship penetration in the account, because there will be a correlation between the relationships we have and performance. If I could squeeze in a 4th one, I certainly would be measuring my opportunity pipeline.
Now, in a follow-up question, sort of a follow-up question, but another one came in that's related, how or would you recommend a phased approach to implementing these metrics? And if so, what type of suggestion would you have in order to phase them? And I guess, like, what order would you put them in?
Yeah, so I definitely would recommend a phased approach, and I like to start with small steps. So in sort of a dovetail from the other question, I'd probably start with those 2 or 3. And my recommendation is, as we formalize our SAM program, is that we educate everybody on what these success measurements are, and that everybody is in tune with what they are. So I would definitely bring metrics into my program right away. I would let everybody understand what they were, and then I would, very important, I would make them, I would inculcate them, for lack of a great word, into my SAM process. So every time I have an internal business review or an account review, one of the core things I would be looking at are those metrics.
Specifically on one of those metrics, there's a question that came in about the account relationship index. Is that able to be calculated for each relevant contact inside of an account?
Yes. So here's what, it's sort of a roll-up of that kind of fact. So what we can do is look at, and we actually chart this out, and look at the alignment rating by an account level, and we factor and weight three critical things, which is four things really: what business unit they're part of, what their management level is, how powerful they are, and how aligned they are with us. That gives us an aggregate rating at a specific account level, contact level, and then we do roll those up to look at an account level or even a regional. We've done one recently where we looked at this at a regional level, so we can parse out those that are assigned to particular regions.
And I want to add a question to my own here to follow up on this, just based on some of the things that came in. In terms of relationship indexes and other metrics, for organizations that might not have the systems or capabilities of figuring out these metrics, what should they do?
You know, I think that there's two things here. First, certainly it's an internal thing. What you want to do is get agreement first as an organization that we're going to have measurements and metrics as part of our SAM program. I think if you want to, where possible, I think enlisting a third party as a resource, you know, it sounds self-serving, but I think it's critical. There are a lot of people that do training and programs and strategic account management, but there's only a few that really do measurements and metrics. I would definitely enlist the support or advice of one of those to guide you in that program. And then I think finally is to make sure that you all agree, and maybe with that third party's help, on what's going to be the best platform to operate under from a technology standpoint, so this becomes an integral part of our account management process.
And that's going to conclude all the questions that we've gotten from the audience or that we have here. I want to thank everybody again for staying on the webinar and listening in, registering, visiting ChapmanHQ.com. We very much appreciate it. Just as a reminder, if you go to ChapmanHQ.com, you can find many more resources, white papers, ebooks, other webinars that are available for download or for you to share or watch or whatever inside of your organization, see as you see fit, but please take advantage. We will follow up with everybody who's been on the webinar with a copy of these slides and eventually a link to this webinar on YouTube where you could rewatch or share as you see fit. So thank you all again very much. I hope that you have a very successful end of September, and we look forward to seeing you on another webinar in a future date. Bye-bye.